Hello. Well, as you can see, I'm going to be doing a video on my father's work. I figured it's October, should do something on a game that has a little bit of creepiness involved in it. So I got this one, I don't know, several weeks ago, but I just played it for the first time yesterday. So we'll do a how to set up and play on this one. So first thing you'll do is take the puzzle piece game board and assemble that. So let me get that done. It should look like this when complete. The piece that fits here is the Insanity track. It's got two sides, one for the first and second generation and one for third generation. So you make sure when you start the game you put it on the side for first and second generation. Next you'll take these storybook tokens and put them somewhere near all players. You'll also take this resource tray and place it somewhere near the board in reach of all players. Then you'll take the plus 50, plus 100 victory point markers and just place them somewhere near the board in reach of players. You'll get your stack of Generation 1, Generation 2 estate tiles, shuffle them up, put them on this location on the board, and then deal one to each of these four spots beneath. And these will be the estate upgrade tiles that are available at the beginning. The Generation 3 estate upgrade tiles will remain in the box until you get to the end of the second generation. There may be a small amount of spoiler here as I showed just how to get set up here with the app, but the first thing you'll do is select New Game. Choose what kind of voice you want. How many players? We'll say we're setting up for a 3-player game. It'll give you some text there. And then you'll enter the names of your players. After you name your players, you come up with a name for your village. The game comes with 3 scenarios, so you select which scenario you want to play. So we'll just choose Cost of Disease. Then there'll be some text telling you to follow the standard setup to get the Cost of Disease box out, and so forth. Then some story text will come up. Then it may give you some extra setup information telling you some things maybe to get out of the scenario box. Then here, for example, it'll tell you to place one of these story tokens, and it'll tell you, depending on the scenario, this one, place it on space 3 of the Insanity track. So you'll take that and put that on space 3. And it also says place one on space 4 of the Creepy track. So you'll take another token and put it up here on space 4 of the Creepy track. And all of this setup information can change. That's just how it's doing it for this particular time that I'm setting up this scenario. But now it'll tell you where to place the suspicion marker. So here it says place it on space 7 of the Creepy track. So that is up here. And then it's saying place the Angry Mob token 1 space to the left of the suspicion marker. And the suspicion marker is like the highest that Angry Mob can go to the right. And it'll give you some more setup information. It'll tell you turn to the Cost of Disease section of the Village Chronicle and to turn to page 1. And then that'll be your starting map that you'll have here in the middle of your board. So let me get that done. So you'll get your Village Chronicle, go to the Cost of Disease section, and then we want to turn to page 1. And you can see that page number here, and then you just set that in the middle of your board, and again then that's your starting map. And again, this could all be different. This is just how it's doing it for this time that I'm playing this scenario. Then it seemed to get some tokens out of the scenario box and give the start player marker to player 3. And this is the first player token, which I'll just give to my player 3. And then it'll just have some information for this round. It'll give you something you can do here. It'll show that if a player reaches the 4th space on the creepy track, which is where the story token is, if a player reaches there, then they'll click here and they'll get some information, something will happen. If a player reaches the 3rd space on the insanity track, which is where we put this story token, then they would click here and they would get some information. And at the end of the round, then you would click here and you would get something to do before the start of the next round. But that's pretty much all the app will be used for at this point. The rest of it is just players playing the actual game. So we'll talk about how that works, how a round works, how players take their turns. As soon as we finish setup, we're not quite done with that yet. You'll take your compulsion cards, shuffle them, and just place them somewhere near the board. You'll take your maladjustment cards, shuffle them, and place them somewhere near the board. You'll get your tray that has the A experiment cards, B experiment cards, C experiment cards. Shuffle each of those decks and then place them back in the tray. Place the generation marker on generation 1 and place the round marker on early. Yep. There we go. Each player will take an estate board. Give each player a player aid card. Each player will get a storage shed. They have an S on the back, and they'll put that in their leftmost estate upgrade section here on the bottom of their estate board. Players' estate board will kind of show the color of the pieces they're going to use. So like purple here for player 3, red here for player 2, and black here for player 1. So you'll take the bases of your color. So like here for black, you've got 2 servant round bases, 1 spouse base that's circular but with little pips or spikes on them, 2 caretaker bases that are square, and 1 self base that's hexagonal. Players will then all have the same 6 different figures, and you can assign them to the bases as you want. So you can make, whichever ones you want to be your servant or your spouse, whichever one you want to be you, and whichever one you want to be your character. You just pop those into the base however you wish. So, if you want this to be a servant, you just pop it into the base. If you want this figure to represent you, then you place it into the base, the hexagonal base that represents self or you. Anyway, you do that for all the bases. All players will do that however they want. Again, you can assign the figures to the bases. If you want to put one of the female figures as the self and one of the male figures of the spouse, that's up to you, however you want to do it. Then you'll take your 2 servant figures with the round base and one of your caretaker figures with the square base and put them here in the lost. All players will do that. They won't all fit in there if you're playing with more than a couple of players, so they just kind of got to fit them how you want. Each player will then take their score marker and put it here on the 0 space of the score track. You'll take your insanity marker of your color and put it on the 1st space of the insanity track, and the creepy marker of your color and put it on the start space here of the creepy track. So with 3 players, you'll have 3 score trackers there, 3 insanity markers here, and 3 creepy markers up here. Each player will take their journal markers of their color, and they're in a different shape for each player, and you'll put them on the start space of each track here on the let me do that off camera. Alright, so you put 1 journal marker on the start space of each journal track. So I've done that for all 3 players here. As you can see, they kind of have different, each player has a different journal marker. Players will then place themselves, their spouse, remember that's the one with the spikes on the base, and the 1 caretaker in their quarters. You'll see it says quarters of your estate board, along with a voting token. So I've got that done here for the other players as well. Actually, I had placed this over here, but I think I said put it on player 3, and for me this is player 3 here, so I'm going to put that there. You then shuffle the masterwork experiments and deal 1 to each player face up, and that will be their masterwork that they'll want to try to complete. I'm going to have to make some room here. The masterworks that were not chosen just go back in the box. Next, you'll take your vanity estate upgrade tiles and arrange them by type. There should be 2 of each. Let me get those laid out. For a total of 10 tiles, 5 different types, but 2 of each. And that finally is set up complete. We should be ready to learn how to play the game. Alright, so how do you play? Well, the game is played over 3 generations. You start with generation 1, and each generation consists of 3 rounds, the early, middle, and late years of your life for each generation. At the end of the 3rd generation, late round, then that's when the game will end and you'll total victory points. So, at the start, you have start of generation, where each player will draw 1 card from each experiment deck. 1A, 1B, and 1C, and that will form their hand of cards. So of course these would be in your hand. I'm just laying them out. Each experiment card shows what it takes to complete that experiment. So like this one requires, an A experiment requires, like this one requires a gear and an animal, whereas a B experiment requires you to have a completed A experiment and also a chemical ingredient, a body, and 2 occult knowledge. And a C requires you to have completed 1 A experiment, 2 B experiments, and then, you know, of course they're different, but this one's a chemical and a gear and a body and 2 occult knowledge. So of course each experiment is different, and then up at the top is the name of it, and then there's usually little flavor text down here, and these are the rewards that you get for completing these experiments. So if you complete this one, you get 2 biology and 1 engineering knowledge cubes. If you complete this one, you get a body, and then that also moves the angry mob 1 space to the left down the track. So, you know, I guess that kind of experiment going on kind of angers the citizenship, and this one not only angers the mob, so they'll move 1 space to the left, but it also moves your creepy marker if you complete this experiment 1 space to the right. And we'll talk about what meaning that has in a little bit. But anyway, at the start of each generation, each player will draw 1A, 1B, and 1C. then you'll also activate any start of generation abilities that you might have on your estate upgrades. For instance, the storage shed says at the start of each generation, gain one resource of your choice. So you could gain any of these: chemical, a knowledge. You got engineering, biology, chemistry, and occult. You got chemical, bodies, animals, gears. So one resource of your choice is what you get at the start of each generation with your storage shed. So, for instance, this player might say he's going to take a chemical, and you're supposed to put any resources you get. You're supposed to put them in your quarters. And of course, another resource is money, so you could also take a money instead. Later in the game, you might get other estate upgrades that give you other start of generation benefits, but you also might have some start of generation penalties, like if you've moved up here on this knowledge track here at the start of this. If you've moved here at the start of gen, you have to move up one on the creepy. If you've moved here at the start of the generation, you also have to move the angry mob one space to the left. And there could be other things depending on what estate upgrade tiles you get. So that's the start of generation. Then next you go to the start of round. So at the start of each round, each player gets to choose one card from a deck of their choice. So you could choose either an A, a B, or a C. So, for example, maybe this guy chooses an A and adds that to his hand of cards. And then you also get 3 money or dollars or coins, whatever you want to call them, at the start of each round. And those go again into your quarters. So each player will do that. That's the start of round, and then you start with the first player and they'll start taking actions. And so the first player will take an action by placing one or more of their figures then at a location, either in the town or on your estate. And then once they've done that, then the next player will take an action by placing one or more of their figures on one location in the town or the state. And you'll continue like that going around. When you no longer have a figure to place or don't want to place a figure, you can pass. Once all players have passed, then that goes to the end of the round. That goes to end of round. So let's talk about the different locations and how you can play at those locations. So a servant, which you don't have any at the beginning of the game, or a spouse, which acts like a servant, but it could be, other than acting like a servant figure, it can, maybe some game effect will specifically mention spouse for an effect or something. But other than that, it acts like a servant. So a servant can be placed on a town location, and when you go there, like if you come here to the farmer's market, you get an animal, so you get to pick an animal, any animal resource. If you come here, you'll get a chemical resource. If you go to the blacksmith, you get a gear. If you go to the traveling caravan here, you get one occult knowledge cube, but that also moves you up one on the creepy track. If you come to the town hall, that moves the angry mob one to the right. Of course, it's at the limit it can go to right now. If you come to the cemetery, you you get a body, but that also moves you up one on the creepy track, and it moves the angry mob one to the left. If you come to the builder's office, you get to purchase one estate upgrade, and they have a cost. You can see what the cost of the available estate upgrades are. And when you're placing them, you always start from the leftmost available space. you can see there's no cost to place in the first 2 spaces there, but once you get over here, you start having to pay not only for the estate upgrade, but you also have to pay to place it in the spot. So here just an extra $1, but here you have to pay an extra $2 to place it. Now you can always replace one if you had one here and one here already, and you bought one and wanted to put it here, but you didn't have the money to pay to put it there, you could replace one that you already have that doesn't have a cost and then just place it there. Or even if you had some here and you're replacing one that you had already placed, you don't have to pay that cost again to put it. But of course you always do have to pay the cost to purchase it. And you'll see that some of these, when you acquire them, they move you up on the creepy track. If it has that icon there, then that's what that means. If you did purchase, say, this servant's quarters and put it in your estate, then you just slide all the tiles above that down and replace it with the next one from the top. And this is a little bit of a spoiler here, but if you go to the church, in this particular scenario, it lets you, if you can pay 0, 1, or 2 money to move your creepy down back left on the track, either 1, 2, or 3 spaces, depending. If you pay 0 and just go to church, you can move it 1 to the left. If you pay 1 money, you can move it 2. If you pay 2 money, you can move it 3. Now that's standard, I think, but for this scenario, remember there's this part here, the build a hospital, and so if also when you go to the church, if you pay 0, 1, or 2, you also will receive 1, 2, or 3 heart tokens depending on how much money you pay, and those have some effect that comes up later in this scenario, but I'm not going to talk any more about that since that's scenario specific spoilers. You can, if you have 2 pieces of the same type, like if you have 2 servants, you could at the same time for one action send both of them to a location, and like if you did that here, you would collect 2 animals instead of, if you just send one, you get 1. If you send both, of course they have to be 2 of the same type. You couldn't send yourself and a servant at the same time. You have to, if you're going to send 2 pieces to the same place at the same time, they have to be the same type. Now, why you might want to do that is because if somebody else's piece is already at a location, it doesn't block you from entering that location. But if you later want to send your piece to that location, it costs you $1. So if somebody else has a piece there already and you send one of your servants there, then you have to pay $1 before you get the reward. So if you know you're going to want to go to that place twice, you may want to send both your servants at the same time. So later on when you go there, if somebody else is there, you don't have to pay that $1. Sorry for the reflection here. Now if you send your self piece, remember the one with the hexagonal, I guess that is. Anyway, with this base, if you send them, let me grab another color, where somebody else already has placed a piece, you do not have to pay the $1. So if you send yourself piece, you don't have to pay the $1. And when you send yourself to a place in town, you get to do that twice. So you would get to take 2 animals here, or 2 gears here, or 2 chemicals here. Some locations may have an icon like this that says ×1. So if you send yourself there, you can only do that once, even though at most of the other locations, if you send yourself, you can do it twice. If it has that icon, you can only do it once. And if there's a penalty for going somewhere, like here at the traveling caravan, if you sent yourself there to get to a cult, you only pay the penalty once. You would only move your creepy 1 time. And that works the same if you sent 2 servants there at one time to get 2 cubes, 2 occult knowledge cubes, you would still only pay the penalty of moving moving yourself up on the creepy track one time. Your caretaker's piece that has the square base, he cannot go to town and do actions there. I guess he's too too creepy for the townsfolk or whatever. But anyway, the caretaker cannot take actions in the town. The caretaker can do estate actions, so let's talk about those. You have the record knowledge action. So when you take that action, you can discard a number. Say, we'll just say, this player had collected 2 biology knowledge. You can move up on the track by, this one requires you to discard 1 biology cube to move up 1 space on the biology track. If you wanted to move up on the chemistry, you'd have to discard 1 chemistry knowledge cube. If you wanted to move up on the engineering, again, you'd have to discard 1 engineering knowledge cube. And if you wanted to move up on occult, you would have to move up 1, or you'd have to discard 1 occult cube to move up. Then the next time you want to move up to the next space, you'd have to discard 2 knowledge cubes, and finally to reach the last space you have to discard 3 knowledge cubes to move to the last space. So why would you want to move up on the knowledge track, you may ask? Well, for each space that you have advanced on a track, you're considered to have that knowledge for doing experiments. So if you had an experiment that required 1 biology knowledge, well, you would have that because you wouldn't have to have the 1 cube because you have 1 permanent knowledge of that. So if you had maybe an experiment that required 2 biology knowledge, you could use the 1. You don't use it. I mean, it just counts as you having 1 permanently. And then if you had another, just 1 biology cube, you could discard that, and then that would give you the experiment. So again, for any that you've advanced on the knowledge track, you're considered to have that knowledge for completing experiments. So for example, if you had moved up 1 on the chemistry and 1 on the biology knowledge track, and you were trying to do this experiment, and it requires 1 biology or 1 chemistry knowledge and 1 biology knowledge, you would just have those by default. You wouldn't have to have the cubes because you've already attained that knowledge by previously recording knowledge. And if you had 1 up here, then that considers that you've got 2 chemistry, and if you're here, that means you have 3 chemistry. So that's what that's for. And then there's also effects that as you reach certain steps, like here, if you reached here at the start of generation, you get to acquire 1 servant from the lost. Here, sorry, the sun's kind of blocking. You store 2 extra resources between generations. We'll talk about why that's helpful later. Here, you're counted as having 1 B experiment. So you know how, like I said, that a C experiment requires you to have completed 1 A and 2 Bs. Well, if you have your knowledge marker here, then you're permanently considered to have completed 1 B experiment. And then the occult, those are usually negative. Like I said, at the start of gen here, you advance your creepy, and if you've moved your occult knowledge up to here, at the start of this gen, you move your angry mob 1 space to the left. Now all of them, when you reach the final space, if you reach the last space on one of the knowledge tracks, you'll see it says plus V. You get to acquire 1 vanity estate upgrade tile. So you choose 1 of your choice and add it to your estate. Of course, if you have to put it in a space that has a cost, you do have to pay that cost. Otherwise, if you have an empty space without a cost, you can put it there. For any estate upgrade tile, you can never have 2 with the same name. So if you ended up moving 2 of your knowledge tracks to the final space. You could not take two of the same Vanity Estate upgrades. So back to the record knowledge, you can take a record knowledge action. Again, you have to discard 1, 2, or 3 cubes to move up. Of course, you have to do them in order. So first time you'd have to discard 1 cube to move up 1 in that knowledge, and so forth. And the next time you could do 2. Also, when you do the record knowledge, you can see by this icon here, you can discard a number of cards from your hand equal to the current level that you just reached. So, if you moved biology to the 2nd level, you could discard 2 cards from your hand and draw 2 new cards of your choice, either A, B, or C, from the decks. If you just reach the 1st level, you can discard 1 card and draw a new card. Whenever you discard an experiment card, you just discard it to the bottom of its deck. If you discard an A, you discard it to the bottom of the A's. So anyway, when you record knowledge, depending on what level on the track you are, you can discard that many cards from your hand and draw back any card. It doesn't. If you discard an A, you don't have to draw an A. If you discard an A, you could draw a C if you want. It's just you discard depending on the level and draw from any deck depending on the level. Now, like I said, a caretaker can do any of these actions. A servant or spouse can also do this action, but you can see by this icon at the end of the round, if you used a servant or spouse to do this action, it's going to go to the lost, so you won't have it for the next round. You can also use yourself to do this action, and not go to the lost. So it's only servants or spouses that will go to the lost if they do the record knowledge action. The other one is perform experiment, which we've kind of talked about already. You can place yourself or a caretaker there and do the perform experiment. And again, you have to have whatever it requires up here on the left. So this one, this A experiment just requires 2 gears, and then you get the reward showed down here. And that's also how you get some victory points. So you'd get 3 engineering knowledge cubes if you completed this, and 2 victory points. So then you'd move yourself up on the victory point track. So we've kind of talked about experiments and how they work, but to actually complete one, you have to take the perform experiment action. Again, you can take that with a caretaker, you can take that with yourself, or 2 servants. So since I only have 1 spouse, I could not use the spouse to take this action. You'd have to have at least 2 servants, or spouse and servant, to take the perform experiment action. And again, at the end of the round, if you've used servants or servant and spouse, they will end up going to the lost at the end of the round. So it's better to use yourself or the caretaker to do that. And finally, anybody, servant, caretaker, or yourself, can do the estate affairs action with no penalty. And for that, you can either take 1 coin resource and put it in your quarters, or you can draw 3 cards, any 3 cards, any combination you want from the A, B, or C decks. You can draw an A, B, or C, 2 A's and a B, however you want. Draw 3 cards, but you only get to keep 1, and then you discard the other 2 to the bottom of their piles. So that's the estate affairs action. So those are pretty much the actions you can do. Now, as the game progresses and the story progresses in later rounds and generations, the town will change depending on things you do and things that happen. So the town will change. You'll flip to a different page, and you may get new additional locations. You may lose some locations. Just different things will happen depending on the scenario and actions that the characters take. But let's talk about a couple of other things we haven't gone over yet: the insanity track and the creepy track. If ever your creepy marker meets up with the angry mob marker, then you can no longer take actions in town. The only action you can take in town is to go to the church to move your creepy marker to the left, but you can't take any other actions in town. You've just become too creepy and weird for the town folk, and they won't have you. But if you go to the church and donate, I guess you become a little less creepy to them. And then, so once you've moved your marker left of the angry mob, then you can start taking town actions again in the future. The insanity track, I didn't mention this, but when you do the perform experiment action and you use occult knowledge for performing an experiment, for instance, this one requires 2 occult knowledge to complete. For each occult knowledge you use, you have to move 1 space on the insanity track. And for each space that you move into, you may have an icon above or above and below, and you have to do, whatever. So if you move into this space, you have to draw 1 compulsion card, which are these ones, which usually tell you something you have to do to get rid of it. So this one, you have to collect a gear on a future turn. If you do collect a gear, you get 2 victory points and you get to discard your compulsion card. Now I will say in the rules, it mentioned when you discard an experiment card that it goes to the bottom of the corresponding experiment deck, but it didn't say when you discard a compulsion card if it goes to the bottom of the deck or if there's a separate, I just put it to the bottom of the deck, so I don't know the answer to that, but I put it to the bottom. Anyway, then if you moved here, you'd have to get another compulsion card and also move up on the creepy. As you move further along, when you get here, you have to either put your spouse or on this spot, so if purple moved here, they would have to take either a spouse or servant. If they don't have one in their quarters, they take it from the lost and put it here on this space. Here it has to be a servant. Here it has to be a servant. Again, move up on the creepy. And here you actually lose a state upgrade tile. If you would move past the last space on the track, then you'd lose 3 victory points and then lose whatever's on the last space again. So you really don't want to move too far on this track. And by the way, the pieces that you do end up having to put here, your servants or spouse, at the end of the round, they'll go to the lost, so you'll lose those. So it's not good to get too far over here, although having some insanity can be a benefit. Like I said, when you reach this space with the story marker, then you would, on the app, you would click the space that says you reached that space on the insanity track and see, something will happen, some story will happen to the person that does that. And again, usually you move up on the insanity track by using occult knowledge when you're completing an experiment. One other thing I didn't mention is the occult knowledge is wild, so you can use that in place of, if you have occult knowledge, you can use that in place of any of the other knowledge. It's like a wild, but again, for each one you use will move you up on the insanity track, even if you're using it in place of, like if you had an experiment that required 2 biology and you didn't have that, but you did have 2 occult and you use that as a wild for the biology, you would have to move up 2 spaces on the insanity track. And I mentioned when you move up on the insanity track, whenever you reach one of these spaces with a compulsion card, you draw that card. Well, like we saw, it has a way to discard it and collect some VP, but at the end of a generation, if you have 2 or more, if you still have 2 or more compulsion cards, then you have to draw a maladjustment card, which is going to be some negative effect that's going to affect you for the entire next generation. And actually, you draw a maladjustment card for every 2 compulsion cards you have. So at the end of a generation, if you still have 4 compulsion cards that you haven't gotten rid of, then you'd have to draw 2 maladjustment cards. So that would not be good. So I think that covers most of the actions. Like I said, you may, as the story progresses, you may get some other actions, locations that you can take, but you know, they'll be similar to these. So you'll take again, you'll take turns placing your figures on locations until everybody. Yeah, as I mentioned, when you no longer have a figure to place or don't have one to place on a location, you pass. Once everybody has passed, then that is the end of round. So when the round ends, you will perform certain actions. At that time, any servants that you've had to place on the insanity track will go into the lost. Then you'll return all the rest of your pieces from the town locations or estate locations to your quarters. You'll then pass the start player token to your left, to the next player to your left. You'll discard the bottom 2 estate upgrade tiles out of the game, slide the other ones down, and refill the 2 empty spaces. And then you'll, on the app, you'll press the end of round section, and there'll be some things that happen, some story that happens that may tell you to change to a different page in the town, or do something with some tokens you may have acquired or something. It just depends on the scenario and what's going on, but there may be something that happens when the story, so you'll hit that storybook, you'll hit the end of round, and then you'll go to you'll advance your round marker to the middle round, and then you'll start with the start of round actions again, where everybody will get $3. Everybody will get to draw 1 card of their choice, and then starting with the player that has the first player token, then they start taking actions with their characters. So you'll do that again. Again, you'll come to end of round and then start the late round, and finally at the end of the late round, then you'll come to the end of generation. At the end of a generation, you get to keep 1 of your incomplete experiments that you have in your hand. You get to choose 1 and keep it. All the other ones you have to discard back to their appropriate, the bottom of their appropriate deck. You get to store 1 of your completed experiments. So, you know, if you had maybe, you know, during that generation you completed these experiments, you get to keep 1 to store. So maybe you want to store your B experiment, you place it here under your stored experiments, and that will count for future generation that you've already got at least 1 completed you know, B experiment if you chose this one. If you chose A, then it would count that you've already had at least 1 completed A experiment, or and so forth. So you get to keep 1 of your completed experiments, and you put it in the stored experiments section. All your other completed experiments you just discard to the bottom of their pile. You will place yourself, 1 caretaker, and your spouse in your quarters. All other figures that you may have acquired go back into the lost. You then have to discard all money and resources that you've acquired. So it's good to use those up before the end of a generation, because all resources and money that you've acquired you're going to lose, except for, you know, if you had reached this location on the knowledge track, you get to store 2 resources between generations, so you could actually keep 2 resources. But otherwise, unless maybe you have an estate upgrade that lets you also keep some resources between generations, you're pretty much starting over just like at the beginning of the game with just yourself, a spouse, a caretaker, and no resources. You'll then reset your insanity pieces back to the beginning of their track. You'll reset your creepy back to the beginning of the creepy track. The app, there may be something for end of generation on the app that you need to click that is going to do some story events, something like that. So if there is, it'll say click at end of generation, and you'll click that, and it'll, may tell you something that happens. But after that, then you start over again. You move your thing to generation 2 and do your start of generation, which is everybody gets to draw one card from the A, B, or C, and then activate any start of generation abilities that you have gotten on your estate upgrade tiles, or maybe like here, if you've gotten your knowledge up to here, like I said, you get a servant at the start of a generation, or you may have some penalties also that have to take effect at the start of generation. And then you do your start of round, and you'd start your next round with the early phase of second generation, and so that's how you'll proceed until you get to the end of the third generation, into the late round. Then that will pretty much bring you to the end of game. Well, I did want to mention at the end of the second generation, you will pick up the generation 1 and 2 estate upgrade tiles, and then you'll get out your generation 3 estate upgrade tiles and place those here instead of the generation 1 and 2s. And then you'll also flip over at the start of generation 3, you'll also flip over the insanity track to the other side, and it'll have some spaces where you just immediately gain maladjustments. But as I was mentioning, at the end of the third round of the third generation, then you'll do any end of generation effects and tap the app for any end of generation effects. And then you'll go to final scoring. So, of course, by then, from completing experiments, your scoring markers will have gone around. If you ever pass 49, then you just take a corresponding victory point marker to your color, so like plus 50, and then you start over on the track. And if you go around again, you would flip it over to the plus 100. But anyway, you would have whatever score you've got from doing experiments and compulsions. You then some of your vanity tiles that you've got in your estate upgrades will give you some final scoring, like this one, you gain 4 victory points. There's other ones, final scoring, gain 6 victory points. So, and then some of the third generation tiles may give you some scoring. So I think most of them are the vanity upgrades. But anyway, any estate upgrade tiles that give you final scoring bonuses, you'll add those. Then you get 1 victory point for each estate upgrade tile that you have. Any maladjustments that you've gained at the end of the third generation are negative 3 victory points. So anyway, then at the end of that, you'll add up whoever has the highest score will be the winner of the game. And if there's a tie, there's various tiebreakers that you can read in the manual. But I think that pretty much covers it on how to play. So I think we'll do, a couple of example turns and then wrap it up. All right, so we've got everybody set back to how they should be at the beginning of the game. We'll go ahead and do our start of generation, where each player gets to draw 1 card from the A, 1 card from the B, and 1 card from the C. And then they each have a storage shed, so they each get at the start of generation where they get to get a resource of their choice. So they may want to look at their cards and see what they're going to need. Like this guy has an A, so he knows he's going to need an animal. So maybe for his storage set of getting a resource of his choice, he's going to take an animal. So again, that goes in his quarters. This guy sees he's got a bee. He could get an animal, or he's got a bee that's going to require some engineering knowledge. So maybe he's going to take an engineering knowledge. And this guy, he looks for his A experiment. He's going to need a body and an animal, so he's going to take a body and put that So because they all have the storage shed, they all get that where they gain one resource of their choice at the start of a generation. Alright, so now we go start of the round. So they each get 3 coins. Alright, I got that for each of them. And then also at the start of the round, they each get to draw one experiment of their choice. So we'll say this player, he's going to draw another A. We'll just say this player, he's also going to draw another A, because that's the best way to get knowledge, is to have completed A experiments, and they're all probably going to need that. So we'll say I just, at the beginning of the game here, start of the first round, they're all going to draw an extra A. Alright, so now we start taking action, starting with the player with the first player marker, which is player number 3 here. So he's got to decide what he wants to do. Well, it looks like to complete his A experiments, he's going to need an animal. He didn't take one, he took an engineer. So he's going to send his spouse to the town, to the farmer's market, and he's going to get an animal. So he just chooses an animal there and puts it in his quarters. Alright, now we come to this player. He took an animal at the beginning, the start of generation, and he's got an experiment that just requires an animal. So he's going to send his caretaker to the perform experiment. He's going to perform this experiment, which it's an A experiment. It only requires an animal, so he will discard his animal. And he's completed that experiment now. So for his reward, he gets 2 biology knowledge. So I'll get those, put them in his quarters, and he gets 1 victory point. So he's the black, so he'll move up 1 victory point. Alright, that's his turn. Well, we'll say this guy, he's going to send his spouse, or she's the woman is the self, so her spouse is this guy. She's going to send her spouse to the builder's office, so she gets to buy 1 upgrade. She's going to buy this servant's quarters, which costs 3 money, which is how much she has. So she'll take that. Doesn't cost anything to place it, and once per generation she gets a servant, so she'll go ahead and take it now. So she'll take one of her color servants, put it in her quarters, and then maybe to mark that you've used that for the generation, maybe take one of these story markers and put it on there or something, just so you know you've used it for that generation. So now you've got that servant. Alright, we're back to our first player. He can complete an experiment now, so he's going to send his caretaker to perform experiment. This one only costs 1 animal, so he's going to complete that one. So he'll discard his animal. That will give him 2 biology. Small mammal vivisection. So he'll get his 2 biology, put him in there, and he also scores 1 victory point. So that is red. So he goes up 1 on the victory point track. Alright, we're back to the black player here. Oh, you know what we forgot to do? When they bought that estate upgrade, we should have shifted down and replaced a new one. So his next A experiment, this B requires a completed A, which we have, but it also requires a gear, a chemical, and some knowledge we don't have. So maybe he wants to try to complete this other A experiment, which just requires 1 gear. So he's going to send himself to the blacksmith, and because he's using himself, he gets to do that twice, so he actually gets 2 gears. So he'll put those in his quarters. That's going to be his action. Okay, back to this guy. Now he's still got 3 people because he acquired that servant, so he still has a servant he can use. His A-level experiment, he's got 2 of them. 1 requires a body and a gear. 1 requires a body and an animal. He's got a body, but to get if he sends a servant to get an animal or a gear, he's going to have to pay $1 since there's somebody already there, and he doesn't have $1 because he spent all his money on that estate upgrade. Now he could send himself to one of those locations and he wouldn't have to pay the $1, and he'll get to do it twice. So I think that's probably what he's going to do. So he's going to go and he's going to go to the farmer's market, and he'll get to get 2 animals, and he doesn't have to pay the $1, or she doesn't have to pay the $1 because she sent herself. So she'll just put the 2 animals in her area. All right, I'll come back to this player. Let's see, we'll just show something else. All right, we'll say he's going to take himself and go to the record knowledge. He's going to record a biology, so he'll discard this biology to record a biology knowledge, and now it's like he's got 1 permanent biology knowledge. Now he also, because he went to level 1, he could discard 1 of his experiment cards and draw another. I think he's going to do that. He's going to discard his C experiment because he knows he's not going to get to 1 for a long time, so it discards to the bottom of the pile, and he'll draw another A. Alright, that's going to be his action. Alright, this guy, he would like to, he's got a gear, he could complete this experiment because he's got a gear, but he would have to use his spouse to complete experiment, and that's not enough. He needs at least 2 servants, plus if he did, he would lose them. So he can't do that, so he's going to do something else. Let's just say, we'll say he's going to get a chemical. So she's going to go to the park, send the spouse to the park, get a chemical, put that resource there. That's it for him. Back to the purple player. He's still got 2 people. He's going to send his caretaker to perform experiment. He'll perform this one that requires a body and an animal, which he has. So he's going to discard a body and an animal. That completes that experiment for him. So he'll put that, we'll say his completed experiments are here. Now that causes him to go up 1 on the insanity track. So her, it's actually her. She'll go up 1, so she has to draw a compulsion card. I think we looked at this one either. So to get rid of it, they have to collect any type of knowledge, so that's pretty easy, and get 1 victory point if you do that. So she's got to keep that compulsion card. But then she also gets a green biology and an occult knowledge. So draw an occult knowledge and a biology knowledge. Put that in her area there, and she gets 3 victory points. So 1, 2, 3. Alright, we come back to the red player. He doesn't have any more figures to do anything with, so he has to pass. We come back to the black player. He has no more figures he can do anything with, so he has to pass. So we come back to the purple player. She still has 1 figure she can play. So she's just going to send this servant here to the estate affairs and just get $1. Remember, you can get $1 or you can draw 3 cards and keep 1. Alright, now they've passed, so back to her. She now doesn't have any more figures, so she has to pass, so that's going to be the end of round. So any servants that were on the insanity track would have to go to the lost, but there aren't any servants on the insanity track, so there's none that go to the lost. So next you return all pieces to your quarters. So you get, so purple collects all their pieces that they have, so they have 4 because they got that extra servant that go back to their quarters. Red still just has their 3 starting figures. And black just has their 3 starting figures, which all go back to their quarters. We'll then pass the start player token to the left, so that'll be the black player will be the first player for the next round. We'll discard these 2 upgrade tiles, shift these down and draw 2 more. We would then get the app and press the end of round section, and some story event may happen. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to show any spoilers. But something, it may say something happens at the end of round. It may not. It may just say go ahead and proceed with your start of round activities. So the next thing we would do is advance the round marker to the middle years and then do our start of round activities, where every player will get 3 coins and get to draw 1 card of their choice. And then we would start the next round with black being the first player. Well, then they would start taking actions like we've seen. So that's how it goes. And then again, you'd go through all 3 rounds. Then you'd get to the end of generation, do end of generation activities. There's a lot of events and stories that will happen in the app at the end of rounds and end of generation that you're going to miss here from my explanation, but I don't want to spoil things and show things, so I'm not showing that. But there's a lot of other events and stuff. Like I said, your town will change and locations will change, and anyway, that's how it goes until you go through 3 generations, 3 rounds per generation. Then you score, final points at the end, and that's the game. I've only played it once. Played it solo by myself as 3 players. I enjoyed it. Seemed a little bit long, but maybe that was just for me playing my first time. Like the first generation seemed to go by quick, but then second and third generation there was a lot of story event stuff happening. It just seemed to take maybe a bit too long, but overall I enjoy the game. I'm looking forward to playing it with somebody besides just myself, which hopefully will happen sometime in the near future. It's way too long a game. I know my wife and daughter won't play it with me, but maybe I'll get somebody, one of my friends or somebody, to come play with me sometime in the near future. But I think that's going to be it. I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.